Have you missed the timeline of any Diddy cases? Do you feel buried in gossip, lost between messy YouTube videos, and tired of the curiosity, never getting a clear picture of how it really started and what came next? This video changes that. Every point here is based on real sources, news outlets, court records, and official reports. No rumors, no filler, just the full timeline of Diddy's cases, step by step. And before we dive in, this is Fame Insight. If you want the truth without the noise, hit subscribe right now. That way you won't miss the next chapter, when this story takes its biggest turn yet. Let's rewind to the moment that lit the fuse, the lawsuit that cracked everything wide open. It all began on November 16, 2023. Singer Cassie Ventura, once signed to Diddy's label and long connected to his public image, filed a federal lawsuit that shook the music industry. In that filing, Cassie alleged years of abuse and coercion. And while lawsuits in Hollywood aren't rare, what happened next was almost unheard of. The case settled in just one day. By November 17th, the papers were signed, the details sealed, and the world was left with more questions than answers. For Cassie, many saw it as closure. For Diddy, it was damage control. But for the public, it was a spark. One filing turned into a firestorm. Suddenly, whispers that had lived in gossip blogs for years had the weight of a courtroom behind them. And once that door opened, more people started stepping forward. The Cassie case wasn't the end, it was the trigger. Because just months later, other lawsuits would start piling on, each more detailed, each painting a bigger picture of what might have been happening behind closed doors. Once Cassie's case broke the silence, the floodgates opened. By early 2024, new lawsuits began surfacing, each one echoing the same themes of manipulation, control, and abuse. But now with fresh details that widened the scope. One of the most talked about came from music producer Rodney Lil Rod Jones, who filed in February 2024. His lawsuit wasn't vague. It laid out names, dates, and shocking claims about life inside Diddy's inner circle. He alleged harassment, exploitation, and toxic environments surrounding studio sessions. Unlike Cassie's quick settlement, Lil Rod's case was built to drag everything into the light. And it wasn't just one lawsuit. As headlines spread, more civil complaints stacked up, and media outlets began piecing together a timeline that stretched back years. For the first time, the industry wasn't just whispering about rumors. It was watching documented accusations stack up in real time. What Cassie started, others continued. Each filing added pressure, each headline amplified the scrutiny, and the walls around Diddy's empire seemed to tighten. But lawsuits are one thing. When federal agents show up with search warrants in hand, that's when whispers turn into sirens. And in March 2024, that's exactly what happened. March 25, 2024, helicopters in the sky, streets blocked off, neighbors in shock. That morning, Homeland Security investigations rolled out simultaneous raids on two properties tied to Sean Diddy Combs, one in Los Angeles, the other in Miami. This wasn't a rumor or an internet headline waiting to be confirmed. These were federal agents with search warrants, entering multi-million-dollar homes, seizing laptops, hard drives, and anything that might connect to the growing web of allegations. The images spread fast. Black SUVs, agents in tactical gear, and the sight of one of the music industry's most powerful figures now under federal spotlight. For many, it was the moment whispers became reality. The gossip blogs couldn't be brushed aside anymore because the federal government doesn't raid without reason. And yet, even with the dramatic visuals and seized evidence, no charges were filed that day. Instead, the mystery deepened. What exactly were agents looking for? And what did they believe they might find? The raids raised the stakes, but they weren't the end game. Because just weeks later, another bombshell would shake the story even harder. A resurfaced video and a growing wave of fallout that made it impossible for Diddy to escape the spotlight. If the raids cracked Diddy's image, what came next shattered it. In May 2024, a surveillance video resurfaced, showing an earlier hotel incident between Diddy and Cassie. The footage was raw, disturbing, and for many, impossible to explain away. Suddenly, the lawsuits weren't just words on paper. Viewers could see part of what Cassie had described. The timing was devastating. While Diddy's team scrambled to control the narrative, public opinion shifted overnight. Brands distanced themselves. Business partners hit pause. Even Revolt, the company Diddy co-founded, made it clear he had already stepped aside as the scandal grew too toxic to ignore. Social media erupted. Clips of the video spread across platforms, fueling outrage, debates, and calls for accountability. What had once been whispered in the background of celebrity gossip was now center stage, undeniable and viral. For Diddy, this wasn't just a reputational hit, it was a collapse of trust. Every lawsuit that followed was amplified by the weight of that footage, and every future move was going to be judged under the shadow of what millions had just witnessed. But in the world of celebrity scandal, nothing hits harder than a courtroom. And by May 2025, the whispers, the lawsuits, and the raids all came to a head in front of a jury. By May 2025, everything had converged. The lawsuits, the raids, the video, the speculation. And now it was time for a jury to decide what was fact, what was fiction, and what was criminal. In a Manhattan federal courtroom, prosecutors painted a sweeping picture. They argued that Diddy's empire wasn't just about music. It was a network of exploitation, intimidation, and control. Their strategy was clear: show patterns, show consistency, and convince jurors this was more than celebrity gossip. The defense countered immediately. To them, this was a stitched-together narrative: consensual adult relationships reframed as crimes, studio chaos mischaracterized as abuse. They urged jurors to see the difference between behavior that was ugly, maybe even immoral, and behavior that was illegal. The courtroom became a stage, and every day brought new witnesses, new testimonies, and new headlines. Reporters lined the sidewalks outside. Social feeds lit up with live updates. For weeks, it felt like the industry itself was on trial, with every detail dissected in real time. And as the testimony piled up, one question loomed: would the government's case hold, or would it collapse under the weight of reasonable doubt? The answer came in July 2025, with a split verdict that stunned almost everyone watching. After weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and endless speculation, the jury finally returned. The room was silent as the verdict was read: not guilty on the most serious charges, sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy. For a moment, it seemed like Diddy might walk away, nearly cleared. But then came the twist. The jury found him guilty on 2 counts under the Mann Act, tied to interstate transportation for prostitution. It was a verdict that split the courtroom and the public. Supporters pointed to the acquittals as proof that the government had overreached. Critics argued that the convictions still showed a pattern the jury couldn't ignore. Online, the reaction was explosive. Some saw vindication, others saw injustice. But everyone agreed, this was no clean win. It was messy, complicated, and guaranteed to drag the saga out even longer. And as reporters rushed to tweet the news, one date instantly became the next focus: October 3rd, 2025, sentencing day. But before sentencing could come into play, one question remained: what exactly did this split verdict mean for Diddy, for the case, and for the system itself? On the surface, the verdict felt contradictory. How could the jury clear Diddy of the biggest charges but still convict him on others? The answer lies in the way the law works. Sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy are heavy charges. They require prosecutors to prove every element: force, fraud, coercion, or a coordinated criminal enterprise. If even one piece feels uncertain, jurors are told they must acquit. But the Mann Act is different. It focuses on interstate transportation for prostitution. The threshold is narrower, and the evidence required can be more straightforward. Things like travel records, messages, or testimony about specific trips. That's where the jury landed. So in plain terms, the government's sweeping theory didn't stick, but the narrower charges did. That's why the verdict was split, and why both sides claimed a kind of victory. For Diddy's defense, the acquittals were the headline. For prosecutors, the convictions kept the door open. And for the public, it was proof that the story was far from over, because the trial may have ended in July, but the real fight was just beginning. The question now wasn't guilt or innocence. It was, how much time would Diddy actually serve? With the verdict in, the countdown began. October 3rd, 2025, the day Diddy would learn his fate. In the weeks leading up, both sides played their final cards. His defense team filed a memo urging the judge for leniency, asking for about 14 months, and arguing he had already served significant time under house arrest. They painted the Mann Act convictions as technical violations, not crimes deserving years behind bars. Prosecutors saw it differently. They pushed for a sentence within federal guidelines, 51 to 63 months, saying anything less would send the wrong message. To them, the convictions mattered, and the court had to show accountability. Meanwhile, the judge made it clear, appeals on the convictions could still be heard, but sentencing would not be delayed. Motions to toss the charges were pending, but the gavel was set to fall on schedule. For Diddy, every outcome was on the table. A shorter sentence could look like a partial win. A longer one could erase decades of power and influence in a single ruling. But while the lawyers battled over numbers, the public was asking a different question. What did this split verdict and the looming sentence actually mean for Diddy's career, his legacy, and the music industry itself? To really see how we got here, let's rewind the key moments that shaped this entire saga. November 2023, Cassie files her lawsuit. Within 24 hours, it's settled. The spark that ignited everything. On Art, early 2024. New lawsuits surface, including Lil Rod's detailed case, stacking more allegations. March 25, 2024. Homeland Security raids Diddy's homes in Los Angeles and Miami, seizing evidence. May 2024. The hotel video resurfaces. Public opinion crashes. Brands distance themselves. Monarch 25. Cassie Floboreg Seju and Esther Tom Sebuinviting 25. Trial begins in New York. Prosecutors versus defense in a high-profile courtroom showdown. July 2025, Gracie won de fan de crash meeken between skull. Each milestone piled onto the next, turning whispers into lawsuits, lawsuits into raids, and raids into a trial that captivated the world. But a recap is just the skeleton. The real question now: what does all of this mean for Diddy, for his legacy, and for the music industry that once saw him as untouchable? At first glance, Cassie's lawsuit could have looked like just another celebrity legal battle, but in reality, it was the turning point. Civil court is often where the truth sneaks out first. Unlike criminal cases, civil filings don't always require the same burden of proof, which means stories that might otherwise stay buried suddenly land in black and white on a public record. That's what Cassie's complaint did. It put years of whispers into a legal document that couldn't be ignored. The fact that it was settled in just one day only fueled more speculation. To some, it looked like closure. To others, it looked like panic. Why settle so fast if there wasn't more to hide? That single move gave credibility to the rumors, encouraged others to step forward, and forced media outlets to start digging deeper. Without Cassie, there may never have been Lil Rod's filing. Without Cassie, federal raids might never have happened. And without Cassie, the public may never have cared enough to pay attention when the trial began. Her case wasn't the whole story, but it was the match that lit the fire. And once the fire spread, it was only a matter of time before federal agents showed up with search warrants in hand. The raids were more than a headline. They were the moment the whispers turned into evidence bags. When Homeland Security rolled into Diddy's Los Angeles and Miami homes on March 25, 2024, it wasn't just another headline. It was the kind of moment that changes the entire narrative. Because here's the truth: federal agents don't raid to make noise. They raid to gather evidence. To get a judge to sign off on a search warrant, investigators have to show probable cause, meaning they already had enough to believe incriminating material could be found inside those mansions. Neighbors watched in disbelief as agents carried out bags and boxes. Media outlets replayed helicopter footage of black SUVs parked out front. And for the first time, the story left the realm of celebrity gossip and entered the reality of a federal investigation. Everyone watching knew this was no longer about he said, she said. It was about hard drives, travel records, financial documents, and whatever else those warrants allowed them to seize. And while the public didn't get to see what was inside those bags, one thing became clear: prosecutors would. But evidence alone doesn't guarantee a conviction. It has to survive the courtroom. And when the jury was finally seated, they made a decision that left the world divided. When the verdict came down in July 2025, it left millions asking the same thing: how could a jury clear Diddy on the biggest allegations but still convict on others? The answer lies in how jurors are instructed to think. The heaviest charges required proof of an organized system of coercion and control. If even one juror wasn't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, the law required them to vote not guilty. But the Mann Act charges were different. Those counts focused only on whether interstate travel was arranged for illegal encounters. The evidence for those trips, records, testimony, communications, was far more direct. Jurors could separate the broader, sweeping allegations from these narrower charges. And that's exactly what they did. In other words, the jury didn't buy the government's whole story. But they weren't willing to let Diddy walk away untouched either. It was a compromise verdict: acquittals on the most serious accusations, convictions on the ones they believed the evidence supported. And with that, the spotlight shifted from guilt to punishment. The only question left: how much time would Diddy actually serve? Because on October 3, 2025, the sentencing gavel falls, and whatever number the judge chooses will echo far beyond the courtroom, reshaping Diddy's legacy, the music industry, and the very conversation around celebrity power. Sentencing isn't just about numbers, it's about messages. For Diddy's lawyers, a light sentence, close to the 14 months they requested, would prove their point. The jury rejected the government's sweeping case, and the punishment should reflect that. They framed the convictions as technical violations, not the kind of crimes that should end a career. But prosecutors pushed back hard. To them, anything less than 4 to 5 years would send the wrong signal. They argued that a celebrity shouldn't walk away with a slap on the wrist when everyday people in similar cases serve real time. The judge now holds the power. Whatever number comes down on October 3, 2025, it won't just decide Diddy's immediate future. It will decide how the music industry, the media, and the public interpret this entire saga. Because behind the headlines and hashtags, the fallout isn't only about Diddy, it's about the careers, contracts, and companies tied to his name. And those decisions may prove just as permanent as any prison sentence. While the courtroom grabbed headlines, the shockwaves hit boardrooms just as hard. Brands that once lined up to work with Diddy suddenly pulled back. Partnerships froze. Corporate allies who once saw him as a safe bet began weighing the risk of staying tied to his name. In business, reputation is currency, and his was burning fast. Even Revolt, the media company he co-founded, distanced itself, reminding the world that he had already stepped aside in 2023. It was a quiet but powerful signal. Even his own platform had to protect itself. For artists linked to his legacy, the questions multiplied. Would old projects be re-released? Would collaborations vanish from playlists? Would future artists even want his name attached to theirs? The industry was watching closely, because once sentencing hits, the ripple effects could reshape not just Diddy's career, but the way labels, partners, and fans treat powerful figures accused of abuse in the future. And beyond the contracts and headlines, there's something more important: the human layer. The people at the center of this story, whose lives will never be the same. Behind the headlines and high-dollar contracts, this case has always been about people. For the accusers, every court appearance meant reopening wounds. Reliving trauma in front of cameras, jurors, and strangers online is no easy burden. Many stepped into that courtroom knowing their credibility would be questioned, their motives dissected, and their pasts dragged into the light. For Diddy, the fall from grace wasn't just financial, it was personal. A man who once defined power and luxury in hip-hop now found himself trading red carpets for court benches. With his future hanging on a single gavel, families were drawn into the spotlight too. Siblings, parents, and children swept up in a storm they didn't choose. And then there were the jurors, ordinary people tasked with weighing extraordinary allegations. Their decision was never about headlines. It was about evidence, law, and conscience. This case, for all its spectacle, has always been human at its core. Lives disrupted, trust broken, legacies questioned, and as the sentencing approaches, that human layer collides with one final reality: what happens next? Appeals, civil suits, and reputations, none of it ends when the judge reads the number. The trial may be over, but the story isn't finished. The first milestone is October 3rd, 2025, sentencing day. That's when the judge decides how much time Diddy will serve on the Mann Act convictions. Whether it's closer to the 14 months his lawyers asked for, or the 4 to 5 years prosecutors want, that number will define the next chapter. But sentencing isn't the end. Diddy's legal team has already filed motions to toss the convictions, and appeals could stretch the fight into years. Even if he serves time, those challenges could reshape the case long after the gavel falls. Then there are the civil lawsuits, still active, still waiting. Some may settle quietly, others may force depositions and discovery, keeping Diddy's name in headlines long past sentencing. And outside the courtroom, the industry itself is left to decide how it moves forward. Will companies continue to cut ties? Will collaborators erase his influence, or will nostalgia try to bring it back? The courtroom may hand down a sentence, but the final verdict, the one written in public opinion, contracts, and legacy, is still being written, and that's why this timeline matters. Because no matter what happens on sentencing day, the story of Sean Diddy Combs is still unfolding, and the next twist may already be closer than we think. So there it is, the full timeline. From Cassie's first lawsuit to federal raids to a split verdict, and now the countdown to sentencing day. But remember this: timelines don't end with a gavel. The appeals, the civil suits, the business fallout, they're all still moving pieces. And that means this story is far from finished. That's why you're watching Fame Insight. We cut through gossip, confusion, and noise to bring you the real sequence of events, straight from verified sources. If you want to be the first to know what happens on October 3rd, when the judge finally decides Diddy's fate, make sure you hit subscribe, tap the bell icon, and drop a comment below. Do you think the judge will go light or make an example out of him? This is one of the most controversial stories in music history, and you won't want to miss the next update. Until then, thanks for watching, stay curious, stay sharp, and as always, this is Fame Insight. When we look back, the story of Sean Diddy Combs isn't just about one man, it's about a system where power can shield people for years, where whispers are ignored until lawsuits pile up, and where accountability only comes when the evidence is too loud to ignore. The Cassie case showed how one voice can light a fuse. The raids proved that even the most powerful names aren't untouchable. And the trial revealed just how complicated justice can be when celebrity, influence, and law collide. What happens on October 3rd, 2025 will close one chapter, but it won't erase the questions this saga has raised. How do we balance fame with accountability? How do we protect victims without trial by media? And how do we stop history from repeating itself in the next big scandal? These aren't just Diddy's questions, they're the music industry's, the public's, and maybe even yours. Because long after the cameras leave the courtroom, this timeline will still matter. And when the next chapter unfolds, you'll find it here at Fame Insight. One last thought before we close. Diddy's story may feel like it's reaching its end, but history shows us that in celebrity scandals, there's always another layer waiting to surface. Hidden lawsuits, old footage, quiet settlements that eventually leak. And if this timeline taught us anything, it's that the truth doesn't always come out all at once. It drips out, piece by piece, until the full picture is undeniable. So if you're wondering whether this is really the end, it probably isn't. Stick with Fame Insight, because when the next chapter drops, you'll want to be the first to see how deep this story really goes. At the end of the day, this case isn't just about verdicts and sentencing, it's about legacy. For decades, Sean Diddy Combs was more than a musician. He was a mogul, a brand, a symbol of success. Now his name is tied to court filings, raids, and headlines that will live online forever. And that raises the ultimate question. When the music fades and the scandals remain, what do we remember more, the art or the accusations? That answer isn't written in court documents. It's written in public memory. And whether you believe Diddy will be remembered for his empire or for his downfall, one thing is certain, this timeline has changed how we see him forever. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Diddy's legacy can survive this? Or is it already sealed? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you're here when the next major twist drops. Because in stories like this, the final chapter is never really the final chapter. This is Fame Insight. Thank you for watching.